this is Inmaculada Pineda from the University of Malaga. Today I'm going to be presenting my third video lesson for the CLIL training program for CLIL teachers in Taiwan. The video lesson today is about CLIL and students as multimodal users. Enjoy!
And today we're going to see how we can foster the production of multimodal communication by students, and so that they can become proficient multimodal users. Now, it is important that we understand that when we are using CLIL methodology, we are using a learner-centered approach. There are two different approaches in terms of focus, and those have to do with teacher-centered approach and with learner-centered approach. The teacher-centered approach is more traditional, and so the roles of learners are relatively more passive, and the roles of teachers are relatively more active, and they are more in control of what's going on in the classroom. Now, when you have a learner-centered approach like CLIL, learners have a responsibility, part of responsibility for their own learning, and they take part in making decisions about their own learning. And then the teacher's roles are seemingly less active, but on the contrary, I think that you work more with a learner-centered approach than with a teacher-centered approach. Now, when you have a focus on students, you have what we call a learner-centered approach or a student-centered approach. In this case, student-centered learning emphasizes students' interests and abilities and learning styles, placing the teacher as a facilitator of learning for individuals rather than for the class as a whole. So basically, in this case, we are accommodating different learning needs, different cognitive needs, and different learning styles. In essence, the teacher's goal in the learning process is to guide students into making new interpretations of the learning material, thereby experiencing content. And this is why it's so important in CLIL that we repeat the same content item in different modes, so that different students with different skills and different abilities would learn from the different modes that you are using. So if you have a more visual type of learner, they would learn more with the pictures. But if you have a more textual type of learner, they would still learn from the lesson, because you're using and integrating different modes into the same learning experience. Now, multiliteracy and multimodal production are essential in student-centered approaches or student-centered focus. Teachers providing tools to students so that they can interpret multimodal messages and eventually experience and create their own multimodal resources. So the idea today is that you teach your students how to create their own meanings by using multimodal resources. It's important that you understand that learners are mimicking multimodal strategies. If you are a successful multimodal teacher, then your students will mimic your strategies, even if you don't instruct them to copy you in those instances. So you may have what we call spontaneous multimodal students production. This has to do with students note-taking. I mentioned this in my first video. And when you have students note-taking, if you are teaching through images, if you are teaching through animations, they may reflect that on their note-taking. Okay, let me show you some examples, again, from my experience in Taiwanese schools, elementary schools, from 2018. Here we have a proficient multimodal teacher, primary teacher on 5th grade, and she's teaching a rock formation to students, okay? And she's using images here. She's using text. She is also using different graphs and different process drawings. And now these are pictures of the notes that students were taking during the session. And what I find very interesting is that they are also including, here they are also including drawings and, the lava, and they're using, and they're also using text, vocabulary, and in some cases they are including Chinese as well. So their notes are already multimodal and they are already multilingual. But no one asked them to do this. They just were asked to take notes on the lesson. And the result was that their notes were multimodal and multilingual, which is fascinating. And so these strategies should be encouraged, because basically what they're doing is they're spontaneously mimicking the teacher, and she is already producing multimodal messages successfully, and this is what they're trying to do as well. This is another example. This is more evidently multilingual, and this person is, again, including drawings, including different graphs, and including the English and the Chinese translation, so that they understand the process of rock formation. But the idea is that our students become proficient multimodal users, not necessarily just spontaneous multimodal users, just mimicking what they see in the classroom, but we should design activities so that they are purposely using multimodal communication and creating multimodal products. So the CLIL teachers become multimodal facilitators, Then we have a number of potential students' multimodal production. Now, all kinds of multimodal production, again, they can be analogical, so by using colors, drawings, etc., like the Taiwanese students I was showing you in my previous examples. And those are analogical, so it's multimodal production with no technology. But today I'm more interested in multimodal production through digital media. And here we have a number of alternatives that we have, so that our students are creating multimodal resources to discuss the content that we are teaching in our classes. One of the things that we can use is cartoons or comic strips or storytelling. So I have an example here of a comic strip. This is obviously analogical. And then here you have Canva, the graphic design software I was mentioning in my previous video lesson. And you can help your students. You create a project, maybe in groups, if you go to the computer room, and they can create a story, only in this case is with the computer, with this particular software. Or they can create videos, like this kid is creating a video, about school and content from school. In this case, it's food. Now, we can also have mind mapping. In the case of mind mapping, you can do it, again, analogically. Like so. So you can do it either in the classroom or as homework. But then you can also create it with software, specific software. In this case, we are using Poplet. It's a specific app that you can use, students can use particularly to create their own mind maps. You can also ask them to create lesson summaries. Now, for lesson summaries, at the end of the lesson or at the end of each session every day, you can ask a volunteer or ask them to take turns to answer this particular question: what did you learn today? And you can use, as in this example, you can use sticky notes. You can use sticky notes in the classroom for a number of purposes. In this case, we could use them for the discussion of specific question on the topic that was covered in your CLIL course during that session. And then students are allowed to bring their sticky notes with their summaries or their answers to the questions, and eventually read what other learners have taken from that particular content. You can have a classroom journal. Again, this is another analogical example of a classroom journal. Physically, you have a journal, and you may have a number of topics, and students are taking turns into writing one page. However, this can very easily turn into multimodal, because if you ask them to heavily depend on just written text without any pictures or without any graphs or drawings, then this would not be a good example of multimodal communication. However, when you turn your classroom journal into a blog, and then you ask students to answer the same question we were asking before: what did you learn today? Or can you summarize the lesson today? Or what was fun today? How did you feel today? There's a number of questions you can always ask your students. Then you can ask them to do it at home on a classroom blog. And these are many reasons why you would have a classroom blog to cover content, particularly in English. One of the interesting things about classroom blogs is that it gives your students a global audience, okay? From experience, the less restrictive your blog is and your blog entries are, the more engagement, the higher engagement levels you'll find from students and also from parents. They are so happy to see that their kid's paragraph with the picture or with the short video has comments from people all around the world because of the use of English. So it's quite interesting and quite fulfilling. Now, you can have lesson-related activities so that they become multimodal users, and they do so successfully. So, for example, you may have typical activities in which they need to list advantages or disadvantages of a specific content point, or a cause and effect type of discussion. And you can ask them to work in groups. And again, I have an analogical example here with cause and effect. But also you can have specific software that you can use to create a comic story or a comic strip or whatever you want to call it, so that you are explaining cause and effect. But in this case, it's digitally. You may have timelines and sequences. Again, in the case of timelines, you can always have them analogically, like in these examples. But then you can have this app timeline in which you can create an actual timeline. Students would need a computer or a tablet, and they create timelines normally in groups. Now, with musical projects, they tend to be technologically slightly more difficult. You cannot cover them in just part of a session like the previous elements I was discussing. But normally they are lots of fun, and normally they are very engaging. They increase motivation, etc. So here I have an example of a musical project. And here I have another example. Again, my presentations are interactive, so if you want to consult it at a later date, you can click here and watch the videos. This is a collaborative project in which students from different schools around the world are singing the same song. And this one is from an Australian rural school, and they are singing a song that they created. It's not a popular song like this one. It's a song that they created. You can create concept boards, again, analogically. So maybe like this one about animals, and they create it in groups. But you could use Pinterest to create different boards, or basically folders, in which the teacher and the students select a number of pictures to describe a specific concept, like so. So this is an example of a board on traveling on Pinterest. Now again, this requires students to have the app on their mobile phones. You can ask them to use their parents' mobile phones. Now the problems and the strategies and the the contextual difficulties you may have in terms of using mobile learning, we're not going to cover that today. Now, the only item on this list that is digital only, it's not possible to have it in an analogical form, is Webquests. Webquests are basically treasure hunts that are guided by the teacher. So basically you need to have relatively long preparation to have very specific instructions. Normally you divide the class into groups, and each group you would have different students with different roles. So for example, if you do a web quest about traveling, you may have one person is the tourist, one person is the hotel concierge, another person is the travel agent, and so on. They have different roles and different levels of involvement, and each of them needs to create different multimodal products. For example, the tourist would need to create postcards about the places that they have visited. The travel agent would need to create a catalog of different options. The hotel concierge would need to probably record a video with the conversation, and so on. So different roles would imply different activities. The good thing is that if you have several web quests during the academic year, you can ask students to switch roles, and so those students who were participating with less challenging roles in a previous web quest can now take a more difficult or complex role in a new web quest. They are lots of fun. Students love them because they are like games. And you can make them about any kind of content that you have: music, math, science, art, you name it. So they're lots of fun, but they require lots and lots and lots of preparation, particularly because you have general guidelines and then guidelines for each role. And then the way to assess this kind of activity when you have a web quest, you normally have a portfolio in which each member of the group would need to submit the product that they were required to do. You can have a digital portfolio and they can upload their materials. Now, the tools that you can use for those elements, those products, multimodal products that your students can create, are simple. For cartoons and comic strips and storytelling, you can use this software, Storyboarder or Storyboard That. Normally this one is preferred by primary educators, and this one is preferred by secondary educators. Then, as I said before, Canva as the graphic design tool, it works wonders. And then Powtoon, it creates video animations without much work and much of a hassle, and it looks very professional. So this one is also very, very popular. Let me show you. This is Storyboard That, and this was created by students. And this is a Powtoon example. This is a video created by teacher, and eventually, as you can see, it's very professional and it takes very little time to do. In terms of mind mapping, you can use Prezi. This is the one I'm using. It has very good templates for timelines, and you can become a free user if you are an educator, so you can have a free account and lots of perks, so it's quite interesting. Canva again for graphic design, but also for mind mapping you can use XMap, Mat Mapping, and Mind Me Up. There are other software and apps online. You can choose whichever you want. I find this one to be relatively easy to use if you're not interested in using Prezi or Canva. Okay, the activities that I'm proposing for today, again, a discussion with questions. They're going to be up for on the screen with the homeroom teacher, but basically it's important to understand if you are promoting your students' output, both in terms of language and in terms of content, and if those resources that you're using, are they analogical or digital or both? And do your students spontaneously, without any instructions to do so, do they create multimodal notes? How do they create it, and what for? Are they multilingual, for example? Can you describe them? And then what difficulties do you predict in case you wanted to your students to create digital multimodal products? I can think of a number of difficulties, but it would be interesting if you could discuss those difficulties and particularly how you could overcome those issues. Okay? Now my second activity, yes, no surprise, is design a lesson plan. In this case, it's not the whole lesson, it's just a task. Okay, so design a task in which your students create multimodal learning products. First, you need to select what kind of product they're going to create. Is it going to be a Webquest with a portfolio? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a story, multimodal story? Then you need to design the task, help your students choose the resources that they're going to integrate, and then how are you going to assess your task? So the maximum length of the task should be 1 hour, and you need to guide them on what kind of resources they can use by providing examples, links, etc. You don't have to actually mention the links that you're going to be using for this particular purpose. And then, but you do need to mention how you are going to assess your students in terms of language use, in terms of content comprehension, in terms of cognition, and also in terms of digital skills. How can you measure how skillful they are in terms of multimodal production? Also, you need to think about your own assessment. How can you assess your task, and how can you make the necessary adjustments for next time? Okay, my tip for this particular video lesson is to use templates. Again, adapt to your students' context and level, and don't be afraid to integrate your own language. So your native language can help. It's never going to prevent learning. It's always going to facilitate learning. So don't be afraid to use your own language and integrate it into your own teaching, particularly in CLIL. There's a number of useful links I am leaving with you. They have to do with musical projects, with blogging in the classroom, with how to use sticky notes in the classrooms. How can you choose blogs to use for your classroom and for your teaching, and how can you create vlogs with your students, so video blogs with your students, and how they can be successful. Thank you. 谢谢。